My microphone was off the whole entire time. Okay, it's on now. So, make sure you know all about sodium balance, potassium balance, acid-base balance, chemical buffers. Okay, there we go. You already know, when we discussed the respiratory system, that it also plays a role in maintaining proper pH, yes? By controlling concentrations of what? Oxygen and carbon dioxide. And that wonderful carbonic acid reaction that everybody dreams about when they sleep at night on page 1010, carbon dioxide plus water gives us carbonic acid, which then dissociates into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. If we put too much of something on one side of this reaction, if we put too much carbon dioxide into this reaction, what is it going to result in? Yes. It's going to result in the production of more carbonic acid, which results in the production of more hydrogen ions. It will create a more acidic environment. If I don't have enough carbon dioxide, what's going to happen? I'm going to move the reaction in the opposite direction so that I won't have enough hydrogen ions in solution. That's going to give us a what? A basic situation. Okay, and again, we discussed this already when we discussed the respiratory system. So are we good with that? Okay. Conserving filtered bicarbonate ions. Oh. Reabsorption of HCO3 is coupled to hydrogen ion secretion. This is basically a very complex group of reactions that is helping us to maintain what? The blood pH. Yes. I'm not going to get crazy about the specifics because I don't want to. So, understand that cells are going to go through metabolic reactions with the use of ions and buffer systems found intracellular and extracellular to help maintain pH. So we're going to find ATPases or protein pumps in plasma membranes that are going to help with these metabolic reactions to maintain pH. So, don't get crazy about that. Abnormalities in acid-base balance can be due to some of the systems that are responsible for maintaining acid-base balance. So, go over terms like respiratory acidosis and alkalosis. This is starting on page 1014. Not only is the respiratory system responsible for controlling ion concentration, but reactions of metabolism are as well. So go over the terms metabolic acidosis and alkalosis. What are the effects of these two phenomena? Go over that as well. Again, you're basically messing up your chemistry. Respiratory and renal compensations. The renal system is also responsible for controlling hydrogen ion concentration. So go over that as well. And we are done with chapter 25. 26. We're done with chapter 26. Any questions? Huh? We could figure out what chapter we're on, we'd be good. Okay, so basically, guys, remember, chapter 26 is everything you already know. Okay? We're just throwing a couple of other terms in there like osmolality. We already talked about buffer systems. We know that. We talked about the respiratory system's role in maintaining fluid compartments, kind of indirectly, but now we understand that the movement of ions in through these compartments is also going to maintain those compartments. And how important it is to make sure that the concentration of water and ions are maintained in these compartments so I can maintain their volume properly. Any questions? Good. 27. 27 is the reproductive system. We will talk about the reproductive system of human male and female. What's the reproductive system for? Making more of you. Yes? I know some of you think you are the end-all and be-all of our species, but no, you're not. You just play a very small role in keeping us all going. So, the reproductive system in both males and females is a system that is responsible for making cells for sexually reproducing organisms. And when you have an organism that reproduces sexually, you have an organism that needs to make new organisms with two sexes of cells. What am I talking about? What cells? Right. I kind of call them half cells almost, because they have half the genetic material in them than all of your other cells, your somatic cells. How many chromosomes do you have in your somatic cells? You have 23 pairs of chromosomes. This is your map. Yes? Does everybody understand what I mean, hopefully at this point in your anatomy and physiology class, what I mean by your map? This is going to determine what kind of proteins you make. Go dust off some cells way back when we talked about transcription and translation using DNA and RNA molecules to produce polypeptides from amino acids. Remember all that stuff? Okay. So where did you get your map from? Exactly. You got half your map from your mother, and you got half your map from your father. And half that map is going to be located in the sex's reproductive cells. What do we call these cells? Somebody said it, gametes. These cells are called gametes, and they have half the genetic material in them. So the reproductive system in both males and females is basically responsible for making these gametes. So we're going to talk about the anatomy of the male's reproductive system first, and we're going to talk about where these cells are produced. Now, the male's reproductive system is different from female's reproductive system. Male's reproductive system and the gametes that are produced in males are actually, believe it or not, produced outside the male's body. Why is that? Anybody know? Temperature. Optimal temperature for the production and maturation of the male's reproductive gametes, and what do we call those guys? Sperm, is actually a little bit lower than body temperature. So the organs in which these cells are produced and matured are actually outside the male's body. And what is that called? In the testes, but they're located in a sac outside the body called the scrotum. So this is where we're going to find the birth of those reproductive cells. Now, through what process do we produce our reproductive cells? Do you remember? Not mitosis, meiosis. And meiosis is kind of a combination of mitosis. And we're making cells from a stem cell. So, the scrotum is where I'm going to find these cells being born and being matured. And we find them in the testes. The testes are located inside the scrotum. Now, before I get away from this diagram, I just want to point out a couple of other parts. In order for males to deposit reproductive cells for reproduction, we have to mature them, and then we have to deposit them. One of the places, and I'm just going to go through the pathway, and we'll talk about each of these places individually in a moment, but we have an area called the epididymis, where we're going to mature those cells, get them ready for their travels, and then they have to leave the male's body through a pathway that's going to pass them all the way up and around and out of the male's body. And during that pathway, more substances are going to be added to these cells to help them on their travels. Substances that are going to provide nutrients for those cells, and substances that are going to help protect those cells. Different glands, and back to the pathway. We're going to take a trip through this area. What's this called? It's called the vas deferens. And then we're going to pass by some glands that are going to, again, add substances to this sperm to help it on its way. All of these substances combined, that is called semen. And all of those substances are going to help mature those cells and protect those cells in their travels. So we have seminal vesicle and something called the ampulla. Then we have to pass through a very large gland called the prostate. And we already met the prostate when we talked about the renal system. Remember that? Then we have to pass by something called the bulbourethral gland before we leave the male's body in that semen, that liquid.
Isn't there something secreted before to cleanse that tube because of urine?
No, some of the secretions of these glands will help do that. Okay? So, closer look then at cross-section of the male's reproductive system. How many testes does a male have? 2. We're going to see that females also have 2 places where they make their reproductive cells, ovaries. And a closer look at the testes themselves, see a very highly intricate group of pathways where these cells need to travel as they mature. So down here in the testes themselves, and this looks like this little egg structure right here, is where we're going to find the cells being born. They're from stem cells. And these stem cells, we've heard that word stem cell before, haven't we? When did we hear stem cells before? Yeah, remember hematopoietic stem cells? We also could use the term basal cells. Where do we hear that term? Yeah, when we talked about special senses, those were the cells that were able to mature into new receptors. So these cells, these stem cells that hang out in the male's reproductive system, can be found in the testes, specifically lining these tiny little tubes. So running throughout the testes, we're going to find tons and tons of tubes called seminiferous tubules. And this is where these cells are going to be born. They're going to mature there, and they have to go through a maturation process where they're also going to develop something very different. And females don't have these kinds of cells, only males have these kinds of cells. What do they have to develop so that they can travel out of the male's reproductive system? Yeah, they need some kind of projection. So they need something called a flagella. So in humans, males can produce flagellated cells.
That's the only cell, right?
Correct. Many other organisms produce flagellated cells. And why do they produce flagellated cells? Or they might be flagellated cells. So they could move through what? Exactly. So males' reproductive cells, in order to fertilize, need to move through fluid. And they have to develop a flagella in their maturation process. So we're going to see a highly intricate group of tubes where that maturation process will take place. And we're going to find the beginnings of those tubes, the seminiferous tubules in the testes of the male's reproductive system. So, seminiferous tubules is where I begin. Then I need to go to this set of tubules. And what was this called, that outside little region? And that's called the epididymis, where I'm going to continue to develop what I need to leave the male's reproductive system, that flagella. I also have to develop a lot of mitochondria. Why do I need to do that as a sperm cell? What's mitochondria for? ATP. Yes? So I need a lot of energy to travel where I need to travel. Yes? So I have to develop a lot of mitochondria and different structures that we'll see later in the sperm cell itself. So the epididymis is a place where I'm going to continue to mature and travel through another series of tubes in the duct of the epididymis, the tail of the epididymis, and then I'm going to eventually, after I've passed through this series of tubes, end up in the ductus or vas deferens. So they discuss the epididymis on page 1028 and the ductus deferens on the following page. Again, this is a diagram of an actual scrotum and testes and some of the structures that hold those on in the male's reproductive system. In this slide, we're actually looking at those cells. And these are cells that line those tubes, the seminiferous tubules, in the testes. So what we see here in this layer is those immature cells. And what does it look like they're doing? You histology kings and queens. What's happening to those cells? This one's in prophase. Aha! They are starting to mature and divide. So, again, in the seminiferous tubules, we're taking immature stem cells and we are causing them to go through cellular division, and we will end up with, you can't see it very well, but cells that have half the genetic material of the cells down here after the process of spermatogenesis, which is part of the meiotic divisions in the male's reproductive system. Okay? So, yes! Made it all the way down! Woo! Yeah, I figured. You want it back? Jeez. No! Alrighty. So, spermatogenesis is the maturation of those immature cells in the seminal vesicles. And as we travel through the male's reproductive system, those cells are then going to receive materials that will help them on their travels. Am I doing a good job, parents? Okay, so what do they need for their travels? Well, the cells have to mature. So the prostate gland, they discuss in the seminal vesicles and prostate gland, and the bulbourethral gland, all of those are discussed under accessory glands of the male's reproductive system. All of these have their job to do as far as their contribution to semen. And again, that's the fluid that's going to help these cells on their travels, help them mature, give them the nutrients they need, and the protection they need. The protection they need, because they're about to go into a very hostile, acidic environment. And in order for them to get to where they need to go, they need protection from that acidic environment. So, secretions from the seminal vesicles and the prostate gland and the bulbourethral gland combined will form semen. And semen serves all of these purposes. So, prostate gland, a single donut-shaped gland, the size of a peach pit, is going to secrete what? Correct. Slightly acidic solution accounts for 1/3 of semen volume, and it's going to contain what? And nutrients, exactly. Because remember, these cells have quite a travel ahead of them, and we need to provide them with as much energy as we can. Sometimes as we get older, the prostate might become inflamed, and some of its antigen-producing or enzyme-producing properties might be upset. Prostate-specific antigen is one of the things that we test in males to determine whether or not there are problems with the prostate, PSA. And sometimes when cancers develop in this region, those levels can be disrupted. So that's one of the quickie blood tests that doctors can do when males are exhibiting symptoms of having problems with the prostate gland. The bulbourethral gland, pea-sized gland, inferior to the prostate. What's it do? Yeah, thick, clear mucus. Why do you think thick, clear mucus is going to help these guys on their travels? What did mucus do for me in the digestive system? Yeah, it protected the lining of the stomach, those cells from an acidic environment. So what is this thick, milky, mucus-like substance going to do for those sperm who are about to enter a very hostile acidic environment? There you go, protect them as well. So we get secretions from the bulbourethral, wish they'd rename that, the bulbourethral gland as sperm travel down or through the male's reproductive system as well. So these secretions are all going to work together. Some of the secretions are also going to have a basic pH to help kind of neutralize that pH in the female's reproductive system. And again, that's what semen is all about. So where does semen have to then be delivered? Well, it has to be delivered into the female's reproductive system. And the female's reproductive system is very different. It's much more protected, and it's inside the female's body cavity. So, during these processes described on page 131 and 132, semen, including sperm and all of those wonderful things that help that sperm on its way, will be delivered to the female's reproductive system. They talk about some homeostatic imbalances, and you've probably seen some commercials about these homeostatic imbalances, and you can kind of figure that one out on your own because of mixed company. Now, I still don't know why there's a bathtub involved, but who knows? It's commercials. So, understand the different components of the male's reproductive system and all of the contributors to the formation of semen. Again, semen contains all of these different contributions as well as what? Mature who? Sperm. What if I cut the pathway in which sperm is contributed to this whole deal? What's that called? That's called a vasectomy. And a male might choose to go through that procedure if they decide that they don't want to contribute their reproductive cells to the formation of any new individuals anymore. They'll still produce all of the substances as usual. They will also still produce cells. And how many cells do males produce in a shot? Millions. Millions. Why millions? Exactly. Because they have a really tough travel ahead of them. And the chances that they make it to their destination are very slim. So males produce millions, up into the 2 millions of sperm in every shot.
So even though the best efforts are cut, do they still produce it?
Yes.
So did they just die?
Yep, they just die off and get reabsorbed into the system. If they all get there, there's going to be a big fight to see who gets in first. And we'll talk about that when we talk about fertilization. Only one can win the race. Yes? Of those 2 million that were produced, only one can win the race. So, when I say win the race, when sperm fertilizes oocyte, we're going to combine that half a genetic map to give us a whole genetic map. So everyone in this classroom came from how many cells? Exactly. So you started off, everyone in this room started off from one cell. And that one cell was formed from 2 half cells. One from your mother and one from your father. So if, for some reason, 2 sperm, for example, make it through and break through into the oocyte, what's going to happen to that genetic map?
It'll die, right?
Yeah. No. It might split a few times, but then it'll just pass and be reabsorbed. So that genetic map, that number of chromosomes is very important. Sometimes our numbers can be off, and that's where we get genetic defects. Sometimes we have one less chromosome than we should, and we'll talk about that when we talk about heredity of different diseases. Sometimes we have one too many chromosomes. Again, that's a problem, because now we either have not enough information in our map or too much information in our map, and that's going to result in genetic defects in the new organism that is formed. Okay? So, the next thing the book talks about is spermatogenesis. And that's basically the cell divisions that will take place to produce those sperm. From one of those immature cells, and up here we're calling it the mother cell, the spermatogonium is what their name is, those immature cells, those stem cells I was talking about in the seminiferous tubules, we are going to get 4 reproductive cells. But in order to get there, we have to go through a couple of stages of cell division. During the process of meiosis, we have sort of 2 sets of cell division that goes on from that stem cell. Now remember, that stem cell and all the other stem cells and all your other somatic cells in your body have how many chromosomes? 23 pairs or 46 total. And that is no different than the stem cell we find in the male's reproductive system. So that mother cell up there at the top of the diagram has 46 chromosomes. Boy, that's hard to say. What's another way of saying I have 46 chromosomes? 23 pairs. Oh, that's hard to say too. Look at the diagram. 2N! There you go. So that cell has 46 chromosomes or 23 pairs. Another way of saying that is 2N. N stands for the 23.
Okay.
So you have 2 pairs. 2N. Yes? Don't worry about the 4. I don't know why they put that in there. That's just confusing. Why do they do that? But remember, it's 46 total. 2N is 23 pairs. I guess they're showing you with a simpler organism because it's easier for you to count to 4. But we have 46 chromosomes. So we have to go through 2 division processes in the process of meiosis. Now, everybody remembers mitosis, yes? Or you better. So when cells divide, what do the daughter cells have to have? When I'm dividing during mitosis, what do my daughters have to have? The exact same thing that I have. So I have to go through a process of cell division. When I'm just hanging out, being a cell, what am I in? What phase am I in? Interphase. Yes? And during interphase, I do what I do for a living as a cell. S, G1, G2. Remember those? If you don't, go back and look it over again, because that's mitosis. Interphase is I'm hanging out doing what I do for a living stage of life. But when it's time for me to go into mitotic stage, what do I have to do at the end of interphase? Well, not at the end, kind of in the middle of interphase. What do I have to do? Start getting ready to split. And how do I start getting ready to split? I have to, I heard it, replicate my chromosomes because I want my daughters to have exactly what I have. So during what phase of interphase? This is really dusting off. Interphase. During the S phase of interphase, I am going to start to replicate my genetic material to prepare me for the mitotic stage of my life. And what does mitosis involve? Prophase, anaphase, or prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Okay. So I'm going to do that just like I was going to split my cells any other time. Except I'm going to do one thing a little bit different. In meiosis, in the formation of gametes, I'm going to go through that first division just like I was going into mitosis. So I'm going to replicate my chromosomes during S phase, and then I'm going to go through all of the different phases that we talked about. And you remember what they all are, don't you? Prophase, what am I doing? Now I have twice as many chromosomes hanging out in my nucleus. What do I have to do during prophase? There's a whole bunch of stuff in there. I have to organize them. I got to wrap them all up in my histone proteins and form what? I have to take chromatid and make them into chromosomes. That's the word I want. So I have to take chromatid, all that loose deoxyribonucleic acid. Why do I have it loose like that? So I can use it during protein synthesis, transcription, and translation. Everybody's giving me the, oh my gosh, what is she talking about? Oh my gosh, I guess I had to remember that stuff. Yeah. So I'm going to take the chromatid and I'm going to condense it because now I have twice as much stuff in there. It's getting crowded in that nucleus. What do I have to do? Condense it so I can then split it up and give it to both my daughters. So I have to form chromosomes during prophase. So now, under the microscope, remember what you see? Starts to look like a whole bunch of thread in that nucleus. It's not nice uniform anymore. You're starting to see these dark things form. Once I condense all of that duplicated genetic material into chromosomes, then I have to organize it nice in the middle. What's that called? metaphase. And then I have to do something whoosh, with the centrioles. Exactly. I have to wrap them up. I have to hold on to them. And then, after they're all lined up in metaphase, then what I have to do? Watch. I got to pull them apart. What phase am I in? Anaphase. So the microtubules shorten and pull up into the centrioles just like fishing poles. Is this ringing a bell? During anaphase. So I can pull those chromosomes to the opposite poles of the cells. And then, if I want my daughters to just look like me, what else do I have to give them? Not just chromosomes, organelles. So I have to start my process at the end of anaphase and during the last phase of metaphase called telophase, I have to undergo cytokinesis. And what's that? Replication of the cellular organelles. So then, at the end of the beginning of this, I'm going to end up with what? 2 daughter cells that look just like those guys up there. Now we have to go into meiosis. So, I'm going to have 2 stages of prophase. Now we're into the second stage of prophase. But this time, I'm not going to go into interphase. So this time, I'm going to go through the same exact thing, except I didn't get a chance to do what? Do what I do for a living. And I didn't get a chance to go through S phase, so I don't get a chance to do what? Replicate my DNA, genetic material. So I'm going to go right into the next stage of prophase. So I'm going to condense all those chromatids, I'm going to line them all up, but now I don't have 92 in there, I only have 46. You see where I'm going? There you go. So I'm going to go through 2 splitting stages. Prophase, exactly the same thing that's happening in metaphase, except now I'm going to start with half the stuff. So instead of starting with 92 chromosomes, I'm going to start with 46 chromosomes. So we go through prophase 1, prophase 2, metaphase 1, metaphase 2. So I'm going to end up with how many daughter cells at the end of meiosis in spermatogenesis? 4 daughter cells. And are they 2N? They are N, which means what in humans? Thank you, 23. How old are you? How old are you? Who just answered my question? How old are you? She's 7. Okay? She answered my question before you did. No, well, yeah, but you know it. She's listening to me. You guys don't listen. Just to embarrass you, the 7-year-old answered before you did. Okay? So, N, 23 chromosomes. Yes? Thank you. Do you understand what spermatogenesis is? So from one stem cell in spermatogenesis, and it's going to be different for females, okay? From one we get how many? 4. 4 gametes from spermatogenesis in males. And that goes through all of that good stuff again. Scanning electron micrograph actually shows us. And what are we looking at here again? Seminiferous tubules. So those immature cells are here. You see my arrow? And by the time they go through their division process, they're going to end up getting thrown into the tube. Now, what is all this stuff? It's not spaghetti. What is it? Those are what? Those are sperm, exactly. So these are the beginnings of their flagella, their tails, during the maturation process. And now they get sent on their travels through the seminiferous tubules. And they're going to continue to mature and develop those flagella. And they're going to develop what we call a neck region and a head region, where the cell will then be ready for its travels out of the male's reproductive system. So this is the actual beginnings of those guys. This is just another way to say what we just talked about. So we have cells, cells from that first mitotic division that will then start going through the two phases of meiosis, meiosis 1, meiosis 2, and what are we going to end up with? 4 spermatozoa, or 4 gametes from spermatogenesis. Excuse me. Another closer look, an illustrated look at their travels through the seminiferous tubules. So we see the spermatogonium, those immature cells. Well, that will then go through the division process that we just talked about to form spermatozoa, and then those spermatozoa are released into the seminiferous tubules for their travels. So they kind of go through a little bit of a metamorphosis. What's a metamorphosis? Yeah, a change in shape from beginning to end. So they go from that nice round cell in the spermatid or spermatogonium in the beginning, and they will then metamorphose, or if that's a word, go through metamorphosis and change what they look like at the end. So what we're going to end up with is a sperm cell. In the head of the sperm, we have a couple of very important things. One is what? Yeah, the chromosomes, the map that I have to get into the female's reproductive system so I can make a whole new organism. Correct. Another thing I'm going to need in my travels is a way to get into the oocyte during the fertilization process. I have to actually, that sperm that wins the race, has to break through a very elaborate group of protective cells around the plasma membrane of the oocyte, or the egg, as most of you know it. And I'm going to need some what we call digestive enzymes to do that. And that is located also in the head in this little crown here called the acrosome. How do I not see? There used to be a nice diagram. This is called the acrosome, this little gray stuff here. And that's what it contains, digestive enzymes. So that's one of the things I have to develop as I mature through all of those tubules in the male's reproductive tract. The other thing I need to have developed is a very highly developed what we call mid-piece. And the mid-piece is kind of sometimes referred to as the neck region of this cell. And what's going to be located in that mid-piece or neck region? Tons of it. Tons and tons and tons of mitochondria. Why? Yeah, this cell has one heck of a travel ahead of it, and it's going to need to be able to produce quite a bit of ATP. So we see excess cytoplasm that kind of wraps around to form the mid-piece or neck region, and that's going to contain tons and tons of mitochondria for this cell. And then, of course, we have the flagellar tail, and that's made of microtubules. So that's spermatogenesis. Now, who is responsible for getting all of this stuff going? And that's what they talk about under hormonal regulation of male reproductive function. So that cell's just kind of hanging out, doing what it does for a living until it comes in contact with something that's going to push it into these mitotic and meiosis stages that causes it to mature. And who are the guys responsible for that? Hormones. So, under hormonal regulation of the male reproductive system, where we will pick up on Tuesday, know all of the different hormones involved in the maturation process.